an intention for our learning time today. It is proven through brain science that when we hold a positive intention, we are actually reorganizing the neural pathways in our brain to set ourselves up for success in the future and even in the moment. So I would just invite you to think about some positive way, something you want to hold, an intention through these few minutes that we have together today that will support you as a learner and that will help you out. And I've got not my dog's face. This is definitely from stock images, but it looks quite a bit like my giant boy dog named Tulip, who my daughter affectionately calls her princess brother. He's thinking, I want to stay open to new ideas, right? Your intention may be, I'm going to continue to focus on this, even though I'm already thinking about making dinner. It could be, I'm going to learn one thing. I'm going to share one thing, whatever it might be. That would be terrific. So just give you a moment to jot down your positive intention on your paper. Look at Michelle. She is modeling for us. Thank you. I can't see very many people in my little restricted chat, so I'll probably be talking about a few of my colleagues. Christy, who welcomed us and is holding the space, and Michelle, who will be my chat buddy, answering any questions you might have and dropping links for me. And then we also have other members of the Arise team who have identified themselves in the chat and are also here to answer any questions you might have, especially from your local context, depending on what region you happen to be in California. So here we are at the end of the day. I sort of loved this picture of climbing up what looks like a pretty steep mountain as the sun is going down. It's not quite that time of day, but we have all probably ascended Everest a few times today, metaphorically. So again, that intention is going to power you. And another way we're going to get powered is by some deep connections with each other. And one of the ways we're going to do that to kick us off is to ground or reground in our core values. So this comes from the work of Elena Aguilar. I'll put her up. Don't worry, I'll go back to that prompt in just a moment. Elena Aguilar and I were colleagues at the Oakland Unified School District many years ago. We've both gone off on different journeys. She continues to be a fabulous leadership coach, instructional coach, etc. And one of the things that she invites people to do is to remember why they do this hard work. Why did you come to this work in the first place? And what powers you through the hard days? And what she did was she created a very non-exhaustive list of different core values. And you'll see that I snipped this and I cut off all the core values from A to E. Apologies for those of you who have those, but if you are able to snap that QR code, you go to her full core values. I'll put that up again in a moment. Also, again, not an exhaustive list. You may have a core value that is not listed here. It doesn't mean that your core value is not a core value. So I'm going to invite you, I'm going to give you 30 seconds right now to list your strongest core values and then pick one that is most responsible for powering the work you do each day. Here's your 30 minutes of silence with Elena's beautiful face and her full list. Sometimes 30 seconds seems long and sometimes it seems real short. That was 30 seconds. I don't know which one it was. Again, I will shout out Michelle for the positive modeling, got her phone out, checked out the longer list. Next invitation here. We're going to send you into a breakout room. You're going to be with one other person. I would like for you to introduce yourselves to each other and then share sort of your longer list of core values, but then really key in to that one core value that brings you to this work every day. You're going to have 3 minutes each to chat with each other. I would like to recommend that you do sort of a dyad protocol where one person shares for 3 minutes and then you switch and then the other person shares for 3 minutes. So using your phone right now, or hopefully if you don't have your phone with you, someone in your room will have one. Please self-time, again, 3 minutes each. And the person with the biggest water bottle will go first. If neither of you has a water bottle, then it's up to you to figure out who gets to go first. But again, the invitation is to share your core value with each other. We will see you back here in just about 6 minutes, and Michelle will send you off into your breakout rooms shortly. Don't worry, you might need another moment to think of your core value, and while she's doing that, I'm just going to go back to the list. It's a math problem, Michelle. I'm 100% on your side right now.
Oh, sorry. I had it up for 40 minutes and that would have been delightful, but not what you asked for. So here we go.
Have fun. Have a really fun, long
A
conversation.
really long conversation. Okay, here we go.
Thank you, ma'am. Okay, we'll see you back here in about 6. I'm just going to sit here, Michelle, if that's okay.
Of course. I actually
Or
here.
Alina is all by herself.
It's okay. I'll move her with Melanie.
Oh, great.
Oh,
Oops, then where did Melanie go?
I don't know. That was weird. Oops.
Gone.
There they go. Okay.
They're together. And we are live. Terrific. Welcome back. I hope you had a nice connection with somebody new, or you learned something new about somebody that you already have a strong connection with, however that worked for you. I'll explain more about why we did that a bit later in the presentation, but I did want to share with you my core values, just so you know a little bit more about me. I was previously a high school English and filmmaking teacher and founded a small school that is still going called Bay Area Digital Arts, which is on the San Lorenzo High School campus, for those of you who know the Bay Area a little bit. In that role, was very deeply connected to my core value of connection and relationships. As I have moved into my role of doing more adult learning facilitation, I tend to dig in more to my sense of humor and my appreciation of humor. Those of you who have worked with me before know this about me. I did have some great direction when I was a baby administrator, from somebody who said, if you mix your humor with a little gravitas, it might be just the right combination. I think he was trying to tell me to get a little bit more serious. So anyway, I am there holding my new granddaughter, my first granddaughter, who made me a grandmother. And that is one of the roles that I really appreciate right now. And humor really helps a lot when you have a little baby around as well. All right. I would like to offer you as a gift the tool here that you can get immediately by either going to the link in the chat that Michelle will drop for you, or by shooting this QR code. This is a norms and expectation planner that is grounded in core values. So it's not going to be different too much from your norms and expectation planners that you've seen in the past, but it does really ground in those core values and reminds you to leverage the core values of your students or of your leadership team or your community engagement committee, whoever you're having meetings with where you want to have community values. It's a really flexible tool. It's created for the teacher from the teacher perspective, but it can be used flexibly. So for those of you who have the core value of flexibility, I invite you to use it to engage with this tool. I do want to let you know that I am coming to you as a member of the Center for Whole Child Education at the Mary Lou Fulton Teacher College, part of the Arizona State University. We were originally a scrappy little nonprofit out of New York City called Turnaround for Children. We worked under that auspice for 20 years and just got adopted by ASU last year. We are really enjoying our new home. the number of neuroscientists thinking about the science of learning and development, which is our jam, has been incredible for us to be a part of. So our work at the Center for Whole Child Education is really about adding an element, an ingredient to teacher education and continuing education. As a teacher, I don't know about you, but I learned a lot about what I needed to teach and how to teach it, many pedagogies. What I often was not apprised of is how humans learn. And that is what the Center for Whole Child Education really focuses on. And we have a strong belief that we have the knowledge today, due to the fact that we can now look at brain scans of people actively engaged in activities. So we know how learners learn better. Taking that knowledge and creating tools and resources, we believe we can dramatically change the student experience. And I think probably all you feel that way too. That's why you're here. Again, we ground in the science of learning and development. You've probably heard this. Linda Darling Hammond, our state superintendent, co-wrote a paper with the founder of our organization, which was about the science of learning and development, the SOLD papers. You can still find those at the Leadership Policy Institute out of Stanford. The way that we work with this information is by grounding in these 5 key science principles. And if you are somebody who really is excited by the science, I have a QR code here for you. Again, Michelle is going to drop a link for you if you don't have your phone with you, or it's easier to bring it up on your computer. If you want to learn more about these 5 key science principles and even dig into the research that grounds those, I invite you to do that. Today, I'm going to be focusing mainly on this 4th key science principle, which is about the fact that learning is integrated. And the second sentence we often say there is, it's not social, emotional, or cognitive. You actually have to pay attention to all parts of the learning brain, the social, emotional, and cognitive at the same time, because that's the way our brain is wired. We don't have a social and emotional part of the brain or a cognitive part of the brain. The brain, as we are learning more and more, is intricately wired together in an integrated fashion. The title of this workshop is 4 Executive Functions, Context Matters. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, let's get really clear about what we're talking about when we're talking about executive functioning, because people have a lot of different ideas about what that means. And in the context of learners learning, and my slides are taking a minute to go, it's important for us to understand what the research is about this. And yep, there it's going to go. It's probably going to go through a couple of different slides here. I'm going to wait for a moment to see what happens. Okay, please enjoy this. Are you able to hear this?
Science tells us that.
I had a feeling that was probably going to happen. All right, let me make sure that I'm sharing my sound.
It did. We were able to hear it.
Is it really laggy?
It was pretty quiet though.
Okay, why don't I just talk about some executive functions? And I will send you, or I will give to Michelle later at a later time a link to this video so you can watch it, just to let you know it comes out of the Institute of the Developing Child out of Harvard. Hopefully that's enough information for you guys to find it if you want to. But here's the roundup. All right, we're going to be talking about 3 core executive functions, and just writ large, executive functions are a set of skills that act like our brain's air traffic control system, managing information, avoiding distractions, adapting in the moment to achieve our goals, short-term and long-term. And these core executive functions are inhibitory control. That's controlling your attention, behavior, your thoughts, and or emotions to override a strong internal predisposition or an external lure. Don't you love that? My external lure right now is that my dog is barking at someone in the other room. And I would love to go find out what's happening, but I'm presenting to a group of people about the science of learning and development. So I have to inhibit my desire to run after him and find out what's going on using my executive function of inhibitory control. Then we have working memory. Working memory is what you use when you need to hold information in your mind while also mentally working with it. So think about, you need to call your doctor, right? And you have to think about the phone number is, and then you have to bring that up again to dial it if you don't have a way of doing it automatically on your phone. And thank God that works, because as a dyslexic, I always get it wrong when I'm trying to recall numbers. But working memory is where we hold, again, information that we are working with in the moment. And then we have cognitive flexibility. That's the ability to change your perspective or approach to a problem, flexibly adjusting to demands, rules, or priorities, like switching between tasks. Let's say that you are engaged in writing something, but you get an important phone call and suddenly have to switch to paying attention to what's happening there. The ability to be able to do that without then being able to go back to that original task, that is where you're using your cognitive flexibility. And these build so many other complex skills on top of that. More complex executive functions that are built on top of these core executive functions are goal setting, planning, reasoning, the ability to delay gratification. I'm going to be coming back to that one. Organizing, self-monitoring, stress reduction. All of these things are based in developing these core executive functioning. So let's take a moment. I'm going to invite you now to complete this executive function self-assessment. It's going to ask you to consider how challenging or not it is to use your different executive function skills in your day-to-day life in two different contexts, at home and at work. All right, so I'm going to give you let's do 3 minutes. Let me allow you to get to the resource. There we go. Michelle dropped it into the chat. You will need to download it to be able to play with it if you've done it on your computer. If you shoot this QR code with your phone, Google should invite you to work with the document. You just say that you want to do that, and then you can go in and take the self-assessment. Just going to pause for a moment to make sure people can get to this and mess with it. Give me a thumbs up if you were able to do it. Michelle's got a thumb up, and that's what I see. And I see Christy and I see Melanie. Thank you, my people who are on screen. Okay, I'm going to be quiet. And thank you, Maria. Even people who aren't on screen can show me that they are paying attention and following along. Let's go ahead and take 3 minutes to take the self-assessment. I'm going to stop talking right now. There's 30 more seconds. Do people need that, or are we ready to move on? I got a thumbs up from one person. We're good? All right, let's go ahead and go for it. So we're going to go back into our core value partner. And those of you who came in after we did core value partners, you will be invited to a room with another person. And what I'd love for you to share is What's easiest for you with your executive functions? What's most challenging? And what about your context? And by context, I mean relationships, environment, sound, smells, right? The things that are around you either support or hinder your executive functions. All right, those are the two questions. And you're going to have about 4 minutes in the breakout room to share that with your partner. Are there any questions about that? All clear. I've got the facial expressions. Appreciate it. All right. Please feel free to join your rooms. I'm wondering if anybody has anything they gained as an insight about themselves that they would be willing to share just for the next minute or so before we move on with content. Remember, I was a high school English teacher. I can wait a really long time.
Well, one is just a quick process. My partner said that she really appreciated that we had an opportunity to have the same people so that we could build that relationships. So that was one. And then just in terms of my own response, I think there are some of those skills I feel stronger at, and others that are definitely more challenging for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just getting that kind of information, and thank you too for noticing. We organized you into the same pair again so that you could get to know each other a little bit better. For the sake of oxytocin, which we're going to be talking about in a moment as well. So thank you for noticing that that was purposeful. One thing that I always reflect on in that case are the ways that I can be more flexible in my home environment than I sometimes can be in my work environment, especially around agreeing to do things that maybe my family members would like to do, where with work colleagues, sometimes I'm like, this is what this meeting was supposed to be about. Can't we just stick to that? And I have a little bit of trouble with some of my flexible thinking. All right, so let's think about these executive functions in the context of literacy and teaching little people and big people how to read. So the big picture is that executive functions are critical for and intertwined with reading and writing skills on a neurobiological level and based on what we can actually observe in students, right? So executive functions actually integrate and synchronize the many processes that are involved in reading. So you already may be very familiar with Scarborough's rope. I was not. As a high school English teacher, I had no knowledge about how to teach kids to read, even though there were students sitting in my class who did not know how to read. My assumption as a high school teacher was that everybody came in knowing to read. And so much of the science of reading is very new to me. So Scarborough's rope, brand new to me, but probably something you know, right? It's a model of literacy development, but this is an updated version which demonstrates that this sort of extra layer of executive function that wraps around this is almost like a myelin sheath. It's what accelerates, protects, and supports all of the different things that a child has to do, that a person or human has to do in order to read, right? All the word recognition, all the language comprehension that has to happen. All of these skills are so interconnected and interdependent between them and executive function skills. It's just almost innumerable when you start thinking about it. So let me just point out a couple, and you will be able to think of a few too. For instance, recognizing letters actually requires that you have some flexible thinking. So if you learn what a P looks like, and then you're introduced to an R, your brain has to acknowledge that there's an extra little mark that makes this thing that you know as a P into an R. And some kids who are still working on their executive function, and particularly their flexible thinking, will get stuck with their letter recognition. And that is what's happening there. Sounding out words actually requires that we use the executive function of working memory. Just think of learning the word word. You have to do w, right? The W and the O together first, wor, and then the R and the D, erd. But you have to keep in your mind that you started the word with a W-O and then you're adding the R and D. So if you are not good with your working memory, it's more difficult to sound out words like that. And then, of course, there's some inhibitory control, which is about disregarding irrelevant information. Sometimes kids will get tripped up if there are too many illustrations on a piece of paper where they're trying to read. Not to mention the external distractions that might be happening around them when they're trying to do something as complicated, right, as some word recognition or trying to figure out what they're supposed to be paying attention to and what they're not. So now let's think about what we can do and understand first, and then think about what we can do to create a more supportive context for executive functions to power our students to be able to learn to read. So when we're talking about context, in this case, we're talking about both internal context, the context of emotions and stress, and also external context, the relationships that we're having with our peers, with our teacher, with people who are outside, our parents, and then also the environment around us, the smells, the sounds, what we're seeing in our line of sight. All of this we have to manage in our classrooms, and we do every day. So some of the best known research about the way that students acquire skills or use skills is the infamous marshmallow test. And this is the one I'm talking about, the original one. You guys know this one? Stanford preschool, the lab school there, right? 3-year-olds asked, do you want to eat one marshmallow now, or can you wait for me to go in the other room and bring a second marshmallow so you can have 2? This was pulling on the higher level executive function of delaying gratification, right? And what happened out of this experiment, because they followed these children across time, was that kids really, who were able to demonstrate the executive function of delaying gratification were found to have, in later life, higher SAT scores, greater persistence through college. More of them were accepted into Ivy League schools. They had lower BMIs, lower rates of teen pregnancy. The number of things that were attributed to this very this single executive function of delaying gratification was ridiculous, right? And then what else happened was that the conclusion drawn from this study was that this particular executive function was a fixed trait, that some students had the ability to delay gratification and others did not. And the ones that did were going to be successful in life, and the ones that didn't were not. And that was what was going to predict their future success. Not true, obviously, right? We know that we can develop executive functions. So let's talk about that. And let's first talk about it in the context of internal context. So here's another little marshmallow test with a twist, okay? And here's the researcher who did this little twist. What he wants us to think about are hot and cool executive functions. So can someone come off mute and read this to the rest of us?
We all know it can be a lot harder to think things through in the heat of the moment or when we're frustrated or angry. But why is that? What's happening in our brain? To understand why kids and adults make decisions differently, depending on whether the stakes are high or low, it helps to learn about hot and cool executive function skills.
Yes, thank you. So in order to learn about this researcher recreated the marshmallow test and asked 3-year-olds the same question, except in one circumstance, the researcher said, hey, I need some help. I can either eat this one marshmallow right now, or I can wait and I can have 2 marshmallows later. What should I do? And the 3-year-olds, almost to a single one, said, you should wait and have the second marshmallow so you can have 2 marshmallows. That's a great idea. However, if they were the ones presented with this conundrum, would you like 1 marshmallow right now, or do you want to wait and get 2? More often, they decided to go for the single one in that moment. Why is that happening? Well, that's because of our hot and cool networks in our brain. When we can be a little bit more dispassionate about things, which was the context that was created when the investigator said, what should I do? This top-down network was initiated, the one that is controlled by the prefrontal cortex, the one that is more rational, slows down, considers things, right? And in that moment, students were able to say, well, of course, you should just wait for the second marshmallow for sure. But when presented with that same choice for themselves, the stakes were higher. They got excited. I get to have a marshmallow. Oh my goodness, right? This is where our bottom-up network comes into play. And the amygdala is the one that takes over. It arouses us. It excites us. It makes us a little more, sometimes too excited. And when we get excited like that, we make rasher decisions that are based in our emotion and things that we want right away, right? This doesn't mean, right, that we have to take all emotion out of learning. We want there to be emotion in learning. And we're going to see a little video about that in a moment. But let's just think for a moment, when you're teaching a student to read, what are some of the reasons that a student's hot network might be activated when they are trying to learn? And you can drop that in the chat. You can come off mute. I will stand here like a statue for 30 seconds and wait for somebody to speak.
I experienced this in the dyslexia simulation yesterday when I could not figure out the word and the teacher kept saying, you should know this.
You should know this, right? Every time you hear it, I heard you say they kept saying, you should know this, right? Yes, worried about others' judgment spikes your stress level, which then disables you from activating your cool network, where of course you would be able to have access to your hippocampus, and you would know that, and you would be able to say it. Thank you for that really recent example. What else am I seeing? Yeah, worried about others' judgment. They don't know the sounds and letters. Stressful, embarrassing. Any of these things that are engaging our hot network to take over our brains is going to put us in a situation where it's harder for us to learn. What we're really trying to do is achieve a balance between those. We want just enough emotion that we are interested and excited, but then just enough cool network coming on that we can think about it, that we can slow down a little bit. You might need to review this at recess. Oh, no. And there you are, your plan to meet your friend at the slide was gone. Yes, it makes you anxious. Thank you for bringing in the language of fixed mindset. Yes, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. You're definitely going to trigger somebody's hot network if you get them into a state of feeling like there's no way for me to do this and I'll never learn, right? Oof, rough. Okay, I'm going to try playing a video again. I can see that my internet is a little bit laggy, but I'm going to try it, and I shared my sound. So let me know if you can hear this, because I'm ever inspired by the words of Mary Helen Imordeno Yang. I've seen this video maybe 250 times at this time, but I love really making sure that people understand that involving emotions is really actually essential to learning. Let me know about the sound, everybody.
My name is Mary Helen Imordino Yang. I'm an affective neuroscientist and an educational psychologist at the University of Southern California. And I study the ways in which children's emotional and social relationships shape their learning and also shape the brain development that undergirds their learning so that they can learn better into the future. And I'm going to start my talk with a picture of my children's jack-o'-lanterns from a few years ago. And the reason is that I think that the jack-o'-lantern is a really fantastic visual metaphor for how children learn. Inside of each one of those little pumpkins is a fire burning, a fire that consumes oxygen and that shines out through that child's actions and through that child's beliefs and through that child's learning in the world. And, you know, historically we've thought, and scientists even thought, that emotions interfere with clear-headed thinking, that in order to learn well, we needed to get our emotions out of our thought, we needed to take our self out of it, we needed to take our feelings out of it, and instead just focus in a kind of pure way on the cognitive skill that we're trying to develop. And what we're learning with our new neuroscientific research is that nothing could be further from the truth in the way that human brains actually learn. And this makes good sense evolutionarily because the ordinary purpose of our brain is to keep us alive. It's to steer our actions and our thoughts and behaviors so that we remember the things that matter, so that we learn the things that we think are going to need in the future, and we don't attend to or spend a lot of time thinking about the stuff that we think doesn't matter or that we think is not important. To demonstrate what I mean, I have a little poem written by a kindergartner about her baby brother named Theodore. She calls him Teddy. And you can see a little picture of her up here with her little pink dress and crayon. And underneath, she's written out her poem. And it says, "Oh, Teddy, we love you more than the whole earth size. As the earth spins every day, we love you as much as usual. But sometimes even more, as you make us proud and happy that you're you." I have a simple question for you. Is that a poem about this little girl's love for her baby brother? Or is that a poem about her budding knowledge of planetary science? Our emotions and our relationships and our cultural experiences in the social world literally organize and shape the development of brain networks that allow us to learn. Over the course of the morning, you're going to hear from my colleagues about their work describing how children's identities, how children's emotional experiences in the learning environments they're exposed to are influencing what they're capable of doing. And I want you.
Okay. She's so powerful every time, and I show different snippets of that every time I'm presenting this material. I just think in so many ways, it's so easy for us, for adult comfort, to say things like, calm down, let's all get quiet, let's all focus, right? All of these things are great things to say, but not when you are actually shutting down excitement about learning. And to know that we need to figure out ways of having a safe yet energizing and exciting environment. It's hard to figure that out sometimes because emotions and stress absolutely work in our brains, right? It changes the way our brain works. This is the limbic system. This is the learning brain, the centers that are most involved in how we learn. And you can see the amygdala, which is in charge of our emotions, is right there at the center of it. And when the amygdala gets very excited about something, it actually engages the hippocampus where we store memories and have learning happen. And the prefrontal cortex, which is all about the executive functions we're talking about here, they all get really engaged. But when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, right, survival mode, that's when the amygdala completely takes over those structures and actually shuts them down with too much cortisol flowing through. It's why we are all here. Our ancestors had an amazing amygdala that flooded their brains with cortisol and kept them safe from all the dangers. And so that's why we exist. However, that kind of stress, if it's constant, if it continues, actually begins to diminish the brain's ability to think and to use its executive function. So it's so important for us to know this about emotion and to have a good balance of emotion and safety, right? Calm, and important trusting relationships. which introduce oxytocin into the environment, into that context. Because oxytocin, the love hormone, works in direct contrast with cortisol. The presence of oxytocin actually forces cortisol out of the way. So if you right now were able to be in a space with your core value partner, you might even be able to see them on the screen or see their name. Just seeing that face or seeing that person's name and knowing that you know something as intimate about them as what drives them to come to work every day, their core value, shoots you with a little oxytocin, which brings down your cortisol level. Relationships are one of the most important components of external context, right? Which is what we're going to talk about next. So here's the marshmallow test again, right? And I don't think I will try to show this video because I want to give us a little bit more time and we're running short. But I will just tell you, in 2012, Celeste Kidd at the University of Rochester wanted to test the marshmallow test with, again, another twist. And the twist came from the fact that she was working in a homeless shelter while she was doing her research work at the University of Rochester. And what she started to think about was, could any of the kids that she was working with at the homeless shelter ever say no to a single marshmallow that was offered and would be given to them immediately? And she thought, no, that context that they're in requires that they say yes to whatever they are given. So this is what she set up. The marshmallow test was going to happen, but before it did, the investigator came in and said, we're going to do an art project together. And I have this little jar of crayons, and we can get started right away with your art project. Or if you can wait for a minute, I can go get a big set of art supplies. And so with one half of the kids, she went away and she came back with a beautiful set of art supplies. And with the other set, she came back in the room and she said, I'm sorry. I thought we had those other supplies, but I don't have them. We're just going to have to make do with the crayons we have here. And then they repeated the marshmallow test. And can you imagine what happened? I see some smiles out there. Yes. Context, right? In the context where the investigator came back with the art supplies, those kids were able to delay gratification for up to 12 minutes. For a 3-year-old, waiting 12 minutes for a second marshmallow to come back without eating the one that's in front of them is kind of remarkable. With the kids who did not get the big art supplies, they generally waited about 3 minutes at the top, because they knew, I can either trust this person or I cannot. They learned in that one trust building or non-trust building moment, whether this was a context in which they would be rewarded for delaying gratification or not rewarded for delaying gratification. Kids are so smart, are they not? So smart. And they can use the skills that they have when we provide a context that supports that. So again, in that moment, I'm going to go back to oxytocin and cortisol. What they are getting from a person who follows through on what they are saying is a dose of oxytocin. And that oxytocin is lowering their stress levels, which is allowing them to use their prefrontal cortex, which allows them to delay gratification. In the other case, where it was like, last time you left, you came back and didn't have anything for me. That makes me a little stressed out. I better eat this marshmallow before you even take this one away from me, right? It puts you in an unsafe position. This is another example. I'm gonna try to show you this little bit of John Powell, because I just can't ever get enough of John Powell, Othering and Belonging Institute at the University of California, Berkeley, who talks about this trust building and the power that it has to change trajectories. So we're going to listen to about 3 minutes of John.
So I assert, we just had a big conference last March, that the issue for the 21st century is belonging and othering. Belonging and othering. And when you belong, a lot of good stuff happens. In fact, I argue that in Britain, that the number one good that a society extends to a population or withholds is a sense of belonging. This is your country, this is your community. And it's not just an idea. It's how do I reflect that idea? I reflect it in terms of tax policy, I reflect in terms of schools, I reflect in terms of who I listen to. And you've all been in a place where you walk in and you feel like, this is not my place. We know in terms of schools, there was a incident at Texas, UT Austin, but it's now been replicated all over the country. Blacks and Latinos were graduating at a much lower rate than whites. About 20% were graduating in 5 years, about 80% for whites, about 30 to 35% for Latinos. And they spent millions of dollars on remedial programs to help those blacks and Latinos do better. And the article, it's a New York Times article, starts off by saying, maybe blacks just can't cut it. You know, I mean, they try hard. And Latinos, well, you know, okay, they're not necessarily that smart. Or maybe that, you know, English is not their first language. So maybe they should go, as Justice Scalia suggested in a recent Supreme Court case, maybe they should go to schools that are not so hard. And there's a professor there who pulled these students together. And he said, let's talk about your experience. Now, as a personal note, I was recruited to UT Austin to be a professor there. It's a great school. I love Austin. It's in a funny state, but it's a great school, great place. And they're taking me around the campus and they're saying, you know, don't pay attention to all this Confederate memorabilia. We're a welcoming school. So they had all of these things to indicate that this wasn't my place. Now, as a professor, I probably could manage that and navigate it, but I can tell you at an unconscious level, it's having an impact. And so when they pulled these students together, almost all of them talked about, this is not my place. I feel very alienated. And just talking about it and helping students to get comfortable with it, within a very short period of time, blacks and Latinos start graduating at almost the same rate as whites. It wasn't a question of lack of capacity, it was a question of lack of belonging. And once they had a sense of belonging, their performance shot up. And it shot up so fast that researchers around the country said it's not possible. But it was possible.
How about that? It wasn't a lack of capacity, it was a lack of belonging. So what's happening in the brain when you don't feel you belong, or if you feel alienated in a place? Which networks are you using there? Hot, yes, bottom up. Thank you. Nicole found a way of showing that to me without coming off mute. Bottom up, right? Stress levels are up. And when stress levels are up, they're actually taking up capacity in our brains, right? They're also, right, shutting down the hippocampus, prefrontal cortex, as we talked about. If you've got an idea that you don't belong somewhere, you are carrying that in your brain such that there's no space. And the simple solution to that John just talked about, that people couldn't believe was the solution, not the gajillion dollars that they spent on remedial programs, but simply bringing these students into community with each other and talking about the fact that they all felt alienated, gave them a sense of community, turned down their hot networks, allowed them the access to their cool networks, to their executive functioning, and suddenly they were doing really well in school. So we just think about the brain's executive function capacity and all the ways that it is being filled as you're trying to teach a student to read, right? Worrying about messing up, trying to figure out what the teacher just told me I was supposed to do that I have to keep in my working memory so that then I can go do it by myself. Thinking that I might be embarrassed by other students seeing what I do, knowing what this information was ahead of time, right? All of these things can happen, and then all my reading strategies fall out of my bowl. There's no room for them. And so I forget how to do those things. Literally, I have no access to those when I'm in a situation like that, which of course calls on us as the educators in that situation to really be paying attention to creating these co-regulating environments for them. And you'll see right in the middle of that blue arrow that's going down, that's the cool network coming down, is a strong sense of belonging, which you can increase by co-creating your classroom and community norms grounded in the core values of your students. What a way to help your students feel like they truly belong in that classroom, except that you, right, listened to what their core values were and you incorporated them thoughtfully into the way you were going to operate together. So co-regulating environments, you can read the list there, feels physically safe and calm, is predictable and consistent, is filled with positive relationships, and provides me with scaffolds for managing my own stress and for learning skills around self-regulation so that I can keep my own biological stress response down and be much more in the business of learning. So here's a little example of some external context, relationships and environments here. So take a moment just to read this paragraph as a description of a reading moment in a classroom and think, what about this environment might make it difficult for students to regulate their attention, thoughts, and behaviors, or in other words, use their executive function skills. What in this environment might make it difficult for students to regulate their executive? So many distractions, right, Nicole? Holy moly. The more you read the paragraph, you're just like, what? What's happening here? And yet, a lot of our classrooms are like this, right? I mean, this is that we are asked to manage large, noisy classrooms and try to provide environments for all different kinds of learners. And there just needs to be a way for us to work with each other to figure out how we are leveraging all of our assets, all of our knowledge, what we need, what we know we need to do to make this a less dysregulating place for kids, right? Who is wearing their noise canceling headphones? Who needs to actually go outside to read where birds are chirping, right? Can the teacher at some point say, we're going to stop circulating and just give you some time to hang out with each other, right? It's just as the adults being much more thoughtful about this. So we're not going to leave you hanging. We actually do have some resources for you to help create this context, both internal and external for kids. But spoiler alert, I'm not going to give them all to you right now. Instead, I'm going to invite you, if you haven't already, to get into those Arise modules and get into the courses where you're going to find a whole ton of downloadable tools and guidance for creating an executive function supportive context, right? So Michelle just dropped a direct link. You can go, you probably were on the site because you signed up for the workshop today, unless somebody forwarded you something or, you know, whatever. But if you go to this beautiful site, you will not only see many of the faces here beautifully posted up on the website because we have some of our administrators here today, but you will also easily be able to enroll in free courses, right, to help support you to develop this kind of context for your students. And in addition to the Whole Child Centers work that we have, our TNTP colleagues have amazing modules about the science of reading and how to create literacy plans with literacy teams in your context. So just a gajillion different resources that are available to you on our Arise website. So one thing this is another way for you to get to the website. I forgot I had a QR code. Michelle got in there ahead of me and dropped the link, which I saw, but please go ahead and shoot this and get it on the phone if you would like. Also easy to sign up from there. And then I also want to remind you that you're already creating this context for your students because you are amazing teachers and reading recovery specialists and administrators who are concerned about this. So This is my invitation for you to share with each other, right? You met your core value partner today. Maybe that's a resource for you to go back to and think about all the things you're already doing to manage stress and emotions in your classrooms, to build trusting relationships with your students and with the other adults in your space, and creating that co-regulating environment for kids. And then really think about, right? You set an intention at the beginning of this presentation. How could you carry that through? What is your intention with what you're going to do with this information? Is your intention to sign up for the Arise modules? If you've already done those, maybe your intention is to use one of these tools before the end of this school year. Maybe it's figuring out what your strategy is for next school year. This is a little bit of a call to action for you right now, but I do want to just take a moment to acknowledge that there's a lot of expertise already here in this space that you can leverage as well. All right, we're going to close, and the last two things I'm going to say to you are, we educators have the power to create a learning experience that not only builds skills, but unlocks skills that students already have inside them by addressing their internal and external context. This is just as important as giving them the skills that they need to learn to read, right? They need to have these coexisting skills also leveraged to support them as they do something that we now understand is so complicated as learning how to read. Okay. My last thing, I wanted to give you actual time in the session, although I'm right at time. I'm really hoping that you will do an exit ticket for us. Let us know how this spring workshop is hitting you. My colleagues from TNTP are going to be up, and I don't remember who's doing the last workshop, but Michelle will come off, or Christy will in a moment, and tell you what's coming up. But please do take our survey so that we can pass on your feedback to our colleagues, so that we're always creating something good for you to have in your toolkit. All right, back to Michelle, Christy, whoever would like to close, unless I closed it already. I see some people have already left.
Well, thank you so much, Gretchen, and thank you everyone for attending today. We do have our next session on May 2nd, and that will be with TNTP around best strategies for foundational skills instruction. And then we'll have on May 16th, the National Center on Intensive Intervention joining us to talk more about database individualization. So thank you again, and we look forward, hopefully we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.